Hi, first I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Darren Maloney. I'm the Southwest Breeding Advisor for VikingGenetics, and I will be the moderator for this event. There's a couple of things that I need to get through before we make a start. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Lactation Persistency webinar. And then I'll just try and work this out. We've never done this before, so it'll be a little bit of trial and error, but I think we'll get it right. So I'll just do that. Yeah, hopefully you can all see my screen. So, yeah, okay.
All good, mate?
Yep. For some reason. Okay. So tonight we're aiming to give you some insights on why lactation persistency values are important in relation to your herd and individual farming systems. How using persistence can benefit your breeding strategy, and how using persistency you can use persistency to achieve your goals. We just have to do some housekeeping, so there's a few things that I need to mention. The webinar has been recorded. It will be sent to all your participants by email. All the webinar participants are muted. If you want to join in the conversation, feel free to use the chat, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. However, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, if you put them in the question tab so we can see them. We should have time at the end for a question and answer. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, we'll send replies via email after the webinar. Tonight's presenter will be Jim Bruce, who's our country manager. Also in the background, we have our senior breeding advisor, Eric Thompson, and our new team members, Travis Parsi, who is our breeding advisor for the Murray Dairy region, and Sandy Kurzman, who is our breeding advisor for Gippsland. So at this point, I will hand it over to Jim, and he will start the presentation.
Thank you, Darren, and welcome everybody. And as Darren did mention, this is our first one of these. We're using a new platform that may be new to not just us, but all of our participants. But we're confident that the system will work well for us. Let me see if I can get my presentation up in the right position as well. That looks like the last slide, doesn't it, Darren?
Yep.
Okay, now hopefully you can see the first slide there. So I'd like to first say a good evening and a very warm welcome to everybody for our first webinar coming out of Australia, from Viking Australia. I'd like to welcome everybody in Australia, as well as a few participants, I believe, joining us from over the ditch in New Zealand. And I believe we may even have some participants joining us from Denmark. So welcome to you all. We'll step through a process to explain what persistency is referring to, how it's calculated, and why it may be beneficial for you to include it in your breeding strategy, and how to get the most from it. Where are we? Oh, there we go. Got to click a bit more. So is a flatter lactation curve helpful to you? Are you feeding to boost fertility without getting the results you'd hoped for? In football, we talk about the 1% as the build champion teams. Persistency could be an important contributor that you've been overlooking, and it may unlock the answers to some of the questions you've been struggling with. So there's three pillars of animal production, and they are genetics, nutrition, and animal health. It's an ongoing battle to get them all right and get them right all the time. But there are points where they intersect, and fertility is one of those as a good example where we can use persistency. Cows lose weight in late pregnancy. They've got a belly full of arms and legs, as they say, leaving less room for feed. So transition feeding and strategic use of concentrates is really important. Cows won't cycle while they're in a negative energy balance, and we've all heard that before. So feed will favour lactation first, growth second in young cows, and fertility last. So we need to find a way that we can balance all of these items of production, of health, and of overall performance. How do we get this balance right? So let's look at how we can use lactation persistency as a trait, which is controlled by genetics. Understanding it has three key effects. Efficiency, which comes about from accurate feeding, actually knowing how your animal is performing and how it wants to perform, and feeding it to unlock that potential. Easier management. If we can reduce the stress on animals at key times of year, key times of production cycle, particularly around the health and fertility traits, we reduce that stress and we get better health and fertility performance. And three, breed cows to suit the way you want to run your farm and focus more on profit. I'm going to say that again because I think this is a key difference in the way some people run their businesses. Let's make sure we breed cows that suit the way we want to run our farm. Let's not try to make everything the way an ideal says it wants to be. Let's actually look at how we want to do it. It's quite an individual thing. And also let's focus on profit. Let's not focus on particular numbers for production or any other trait around the cattle or so forth. We're really dairying to make profit. So let's make sure our decisions focus on profit. So, what is lactation persistency? Lactation persistency is referred to in many ways through the literature. However, for our purpose and for the Nordic evaluation, it's defined as this: the amount of milk lost or gained due to the shape of an animal's lactation curve from day 100 to day 300 in milk. And again, I'm going to go back to that. It's the amount of milk lost or gained due to the shape of an animal's lactation curve from day 100 to day 300 of the lactation. The Nordic evaluation has calculated an EPV for persistency since 2006. So we've got quite a backlog of information in the evaluation that we can use when choosing sires. Okay, hold on folks, here comes the technical bit. How is the breeding value for persistency calculated? Take the milk yield at 100 days in milk. So at day 100, we're going to take that milk yield and we're going to double it. This gives us a theoretical 200-day yield if a constant curve was assumed for the rest of the 300-day lactation. Then we're going to subtract the actual yield between day 100 and day 299. This will give us our persistency value. So just to recap on that, we look at the milk yield at day 100, up to day 100. We double it and we consider that double value. That's the next 200 days of the lactation. That's what a theoretical milk yield would be if we assume a flat milk curve. Now, obviously, that's not how cows work. They're either going to be higher or lower, and that's what we're looking to calculate with the persistency EPV. The calculation is weighted differently across each lactation to determine the EPV, so we're gathering records on first, second, third lactations in cows, And of course, the way they perform in different lactations is different as the cow gets older. If you'd like more detail on the calculation, I'm not going to go into deep numbers just at the moment. If you want more detailed explanation of how that calculation works, please email info@vikinggenetics.com.au and we'll be able to send you a more technical explanation with all the details. So, using that EPV, what we're looking at here is the lactation curve and the persistency values expressed here for 3 different Viking bulls: Evertop, Evade and Leighton. Now, the reason we've used these bulls is not to showcase the bulls, but it's because these 3 bulls, their daughters have the same milk yield. Now, the interesting part in these 3 bulls is while they have the same milk yield, their curve and their EPV for persistency is quite different. You'll see Evertop is what a lot of people considers to be a more normal or traditional lactation curve, where this is the dark line at the top. I'm hoping you can see my cursor there. So this is an EPV below 100, and this is where the milk comes early. She comes in and she comes in strong and comes in early and then declines throughout the balance of the lactation. We then look at the middle line here for Evade. Doesn't start as strong, but continues through and stays stronger for longer in the lactation, and that's the average of 100 EPV. And then we see Leighton, and this fellow is a higher persistency value, and so he will come in slow and he will build right through the lactation, tapering only at the end. We then see the 3 lines at the bottom here are looking at the lactation persistency EPV, and this is where we look at the difference between theoretical milk and the actual milk yield. And what we see in the case of Evertop is we see this negative line, or this declining line, showing the lower persistency value, because as you can see up here, his milk is fading away, and so it's reflected in this EPV value below the average. Evade will stay around about the average, having an EPV that comes in at 100. Now, I'm sure that will probably raise a few questions, and we do have time at the end for questions. And if there's anything really, really pertinent to the moment, I'm sure Darren will stop me and throw it in, but we'll keep moving through. So getting the right lactation persistency in your herd is a really individual choice matched to your management style, your objectives, and your environment. So are you pursuing health and fertility issues? Are you pursuing a more intensive system? Sorry, I've lost my point here on the slide. So high persistency is going to push the lactation peak later in the lactation and generally make it less extreme. This reduces stress on high yielding cows, on fertility, on udder health and integrity, and on cow longevity. A generally flatter curve is a least stress curve. So now we're going to talk about breeding for optimal persistency. I beg your pardon, I did jump forward to the wrong slide there a moment ago. Getting the right lactation persistency in your herd is an individual choice matched to your management style, your objectives and your environment. So are you pursuing health and fertility issues, as in point number 1 here? Is yours a more intensive system? Can persistency help you feed more accurately and manage those cows and their digestive health better? These are all very individual features that leads to the point, I guess, that there's no right or wrong persistency number. They're all different and they can all help you achieve your objectives. So if we consider a high lactation persistency EBV or a low EBV, let's see where that could apply. If you're spring calving and you want to use the bulls that breed daughters with lower persistency, that could help you utilize pastures at the correct stage of production. So let's align our calving, let's align our lactation persistency, our peak lactation, so that we can utilize the cheapest feed source that we have, and that's grown pasture. And let's use that in the cheapest possible fashion, and that is by grazing rather than feeding it back to cattle at a later time. And therefore, this is a cheaper ration replacing some concentrates around that peak yield period. So an EBV below 100 would suit that type of program in a good season like we're having at the moment. On the other hand, if you're autumn calving, you might want to select bulls with a higher persistency value. This allows you to feed cows more accurately according to their genetic potential and achieve that higher efficiency. In the autumn, we don't have necessarily a high and sharp peak in feed. Sometimes the autumns can be less reliable. And so having an animal that doesn't have that peak stress point for feed can make your management a lot easier and a lot more efficient in the way that you run the program. So demonstrating here that a low EBV is useful, a high EBV is useful, neither one or the other is the correct EBV. They both can be correct in different circumstances. So there's no one answer, as I say. I think if we talk about high and low are both potentially correct. The other point here is as you start breeding, higher or lower can also help you move the herd average in the direction that you need to go. So looking here across a range of bulls, it's important to point out that high persistency bulls that can be selected for that flatter lactation curve, they exist across all three of the breeds that we operate in, being Holstein, the Viking Red, and Viking Jersey. Now there's a range of different bulls, and I guess Darren or even Eric, if you want to pipe in here, there's quite a significant difference in the type of bulls we're looking at, but they do represent the various styles of bulls, but they can all be selected in that high persistency area. Similarly, if it's low persistency bulls that we're looking for, then again, a range of bulls, proven bulls, genomic bulls, polled bulls across all of the breeds, and representing a broad range of other traits that can fit for your spring calving herd in particular. So I can hear little noises in the background coming through, which I believe is the questions or the chat happening. And I'm sure there are some questions starting to accumulate. So at this point, we're going to do a little bit of just a summary here, just to help identify how we take lactation persistence to secure the best decisions for the herd's future. So let's get to know the current lactation curve in your dairy herd. And the best way to look at the current lactation curves in your dairy herd, whether that's individual cows or the whole herd, is going to be through herd test. And whether that's herd test through your local herd test organisation, or whether that's herd test with on-farm inline milk monitors, understanding the lactation persistence in the herd is something that you'll get from that data. Alternately, if you're not a herd test herd, then we can get a general idea across the herd, provided you've got a nice tight calving pattern. You can get a general idea just on milk receipts and when the bulk of the herd is hitting that peak lactation point, and that gives you some idea from which you can then extrapolate and start selecting size to make the changes that you're looking for. Moving further forward, we're hoping that in the coming year we'll be offering genomic testing where lactation persistence is actually one of the traits that through the Nordic evaluation we can give an EPV for lactation persistence on animals through a genomic evaluation. So get to know the curve that you currently have so that you can then use the persistency index as a tool to shift your business in the right direction to suit the dairy that you want to have. Using lactation persistence, we can work towards higher efficiency, and we talk efficiency a lot in the dairy space at the moment. We're not specifically talking about feed efficiency here at the moment. We're talking about the efficiency of the dairy business. And as the second point says, build a more profitable and sustainable dairy business. We're focusing on using this information to help us mould our herd to be the most profitable and sustainable business that we can possibly have. So make the best decisions for your herd. Working side by side with our breeding advisors to develop your genetic strategy, VikingGenetics can support you in making the breeding strategy that's based on your herd's unique goals. So let's gather that information, draw it together from your herd test results. Let's look at lactation persistence. Then let's look at where it is that you're farming, the environment you're in, the resources that you have available to make your business, and let's make some decisions on how that breeding strategy can work with your nutrition, your animal health, and your overall farm resources to come up with a breeding strategy that fits the business that you want to have. Then we can also help in identifying sires that, particularly from lactation persistence perspective, fit the business that we've designed with you, and can help you achieve that objective. And then finally, the third area is making a complete mating plan. And the complete mating plan is, of course, where we can utilise tools such as our VikMate mating program, where either genomic results or other on-farm herd information that we can draw into the VikMate program, we can then utilise that as a mating program, as many of you will be familiar with across the industry. And we can incorporate all of that information into the decisions that we make. So that is the conclusion of the presentation. So I'll throw back to Darren, and Darren, we can perhaps look at some of those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, we've had a couple of questions come through. Anna asked the question, is it better with a lower EPV for lactation persistency in seasonal calving systems? I think that was just before you went over it. I think it was slide 12 that you went through the difference between that, Jim. Is that correct?
Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to get rid of that presentation, but never mind. I think no, it's not. Yeah, the answer to the question there is it depends on when you're calving, whether it's autumn or spring. And so, yeah, higher or lower will be suited autumn or spring differently.
And I guess that leads on to another question about the correlation between persistency and the save feeding index, if there is one.
I think that's a really good question, and as I did allude to, we talk about efficiency a lot in the industry today, and I think it's fair to say the data and the research and the accumulation of information around feeding efficiency is all relatively new across industry at the moment, and so in the data at the moment, there's not that we could find, there's not any published information that links or gives a defined correlation between persistency and feed efficiency. Although I'm sure, and Darren, you might like to comment there as well, I'm sure, whilst not a scientific proven correlation between feed efficiency per se, perhaps efficiency overall. And as I say, Darren, have you got something that you'd like to throw in there?
Yeah, I think with that one, it's probably you'd look at it a bit more in the way of economic efficiency maybe than feed efficiency. and by that, I mean using the values to maximise your grazing potential rather than your brought-in feed. So choosing the cows with the EBVs that match when you grow the most grass, and so when you carve, rather than relying on bought-in feed. So that's probably the efficiency rather than saved feed in that. So it becomes more of a economic efficiency than a animal or a metabolic efficiency, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right. And as I did say at the top, I think we need to be focusing in this area on the business of dairying as well. It's efficiency of feeding, it's efficiency of environmental management, it's efficiency of resource management across the farm, and that's where persistency can really assist in grouping the cattle in the right space for the business that we want to run.
And then there's a couple more. Just the heritability of the persistency. How is that?
Yeah, sure. So the heritability of persistency in the literature is depending on where you look, and as I said at the top, it's defined in a few different ways. But in the literature, it's the heritability is quoted as 0.11 to 0.18, depending on where you look. So it's sort of similar to the heritabilities we see with lifetime milk yield and some of the type traits that we follow as well. So it's certainly not low heritability, but it's sort of mid-range in terms of heritability.
And then the last question that I have here was, what is a complete mating plan? But I guess you sort of went through that as well on slide 17.
Yep. And look, I think that I did also mention earlier that there's a question that came to me was, what's the best way to identify the lactation persistency in my animals and in my herd, and I just want to go back to that and talk about very briefly herd recording. And I think it's fair to say, Darren, there's herd recording and there's herd recording. If you are doing herd recording with inline milk monitors and you're getting a constant stream of data, you're going to provide a really accurate picture of the lactation persistency, even on individuals, and the variation across the herd. And I think that's going to be a meaningful picture that you can paint. If you're doing herd tests through your local herd test centre, you need to be doing that herd test, on the 4 weekly or 6 weekly cycles. Any less often than that, and you're not really going to see the trend to reveal the persistency in your herd. So I think it does. This area does reward those that have that stronger commitment to herd testing. So it's another way of, I guess, creating extra value in the work and the expense that people go to in performing herd tests on a regular basis.
Too easy. Yeah, so that was the last question that I have here that's been asked during the presentation. So if there's no other questions, if anyone has one, now's the time to ask it.
Don't be shy, folks. It's a new platform, and I'll check my phone to see if I'm getting text messages to say people can't leave questions. But don't be shy. Please leave a question. And as we've said, we will send a copy of the presentation to participants via email. We'll also send a copy to anyone of the more detailed explanation of the calculation of lactation persistency EBV if they let us know through the info@vikinggenetics.com.au email.
So I guess at this point we'll finish up. I'd like to thank Jim for doing the big presentation. I know I learnt new stuff when I was going through it as well, so that was good. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and yeah, if there's no other questions, I think we'll.
I've just got a little question that's come up in the chat here, actually.
EBV.
EBV's EBV, that's a typo. So, yeah, so the lactation persistency EBV is in the Nordic evaluation. It's not in the Australian evaluation. The best way to look at the persistency EBVs would be to take a look at perhaps our website, vikinggenetics.com.au, and look at the graphs on bulls there, where you'll see the persistencies displayed. It's also in our catalogue. We've included it on the graphs in our catalogue this season. And Greg says cheers. Thank you, Greg.
Too easy.
So that looks like we may nearly have got the last of the questions there. I'll also point out, I think, Greg, the persistency EBV can be found. I'm not sure how to find it, but I think it can be found in the Canadian evaluation. So it's not just us. It's something that's seen around the world. But I think we've got a lot of information, and it's available there for you. Okay.
I think that's about all tonight. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully the next time we do will be as informative as this one, and we'll all see you then as well. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, everybody.